Hey, what a great crowd on a Saturday morning with threatening weather, among other things. First of all, I'm going to do a couple of things. First, I want to thank you for everything you've done for me. Second, I'm going to talk about Steve Bullock and why I'm for him. And then I'm going to have the great opportunity to introduce Representative Andy McKean, who's been my friend for 40 years. And I'm a great admirer of his, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But you know, I've been Attorney General quite a while now. And it's a great job. And why it's a great job is you get to use the law to serve the interest of ordinary Iowans in just a whole host of ways. And that's just been a great opportunity and responsibility, but it's a great reward. I really feel really good about the kinds of things we're able to do. And I never would have had this opportunity but for people like the people in this room. So, you know, thanks for helping me so much and getting me elected. As it turns out, so many times. Thank you so much. And then a few days ago, I endorsed for president my friend Steve Bullock, and I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm doing that. I sort of describe it as the Bullock package. It's a host of things and qualities about it, and let me tell you about that. First and foremost, it's character. He's a man of immense character, incredible integrity. Always will do what he says, does what he believes in, even if it's not popular at the time. That kind of personal and public character is very important to me. And frankly, I think what we've seen in Washington sort of underscores why that is just so important. And then he's a man of immense ability. He's bright, perceptive, he's able to analyze things, he's able to figure out what are the public policies that are going to serve the interest of people in the best and most successful way. And then he's got good judgment. Judgment is intangible. That is just so important. Judgment in terms of politics, public policy, and his personal life. That kind of judgment is I think incredibly important. Then he's sort of where I am on the issues. He's not a moderate. He's not on the left, on the far left of our side. He's what I at least think is sort of the mainstream of what a progressive and a liberal is. His views are, I think, similar to President Obama's. Brock might be a little bit to the left of Steve, but not far. And then sort of the clincher for me is his ability to connect with people. We found out last time that connecting with people is just so important. And over the years, I've seen quite a few people come through Iowa as presidential candidates. And he connects with people better than anybody except Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, in my view. And that's what's allowed him to be so successful in Montana, which is a Republican state. He's so successful that 3 years ago, Trump carried Montana by 20 points. Steve carried it by 4. So he ran 24 points ahead of Hillary. And that's because he's out in the rural areas. He's with working class people and connects with them. That's allowed him to win. And that's what we really need today, I think, as a presidential candidate in Iowa and throughout the country, particularly the Midwest, someone who can connect with voters. Let me tell you a little story about how that pulls a lot of that together. He has a number of significant accomplishments, liberal, progressive accomplishments in the legislature, even with the Republican legislature that's even more Republican than the Iowa legislature. Pre-kindergarten, college tuition and supporting colleges like only 3 or 4 states have in recent years, very unlike Iowa, for instance. Campaign finance reform. But probably the most important reform that he's accomplished there is the expansion of Medicaid. As a result of his efforts and others, about 100,000 people have insurance, health insurance, that otherwise wouldn't have, about 10% of their population. And here's, among other ways, how he did it. had a town meeting on healthcare in Choteau, Montana, a town of about 1,700 people. And as he said, everybody knew he was coming, because the Koch brothers had called him and written them, told him three things: that he was coming, that he was terrible, and that he was going to ruin their health care. So he has a health care meeting, a town meeting on health care under these circumstances. And the hospital administrator, he worked a lot with hospital administrators on this issue. Hospital administrator was about the second person to speak up. And he said, you know, you should know that about 40% of our patients do not have health insurance. I'm not sure how long the hospital can continue this way. About two speakers or three later was the county commissioner, which is like our county supervisor. The county commissioner spoke up and said, oh, this is good, we're adding chairs. That's a very good sign, by the way. County commissioner said, I was born in this hospital. This hospital saved my life. You should also know if we lose the hospital, we probably lose it. So that group of people came around to support Medicaid expansion. The state representative in that district, who was a Republican, was one of those that switched over to support it. So that's the kind of person that we have in Steve Bullock, that can bring together so many different things that are so important to us and so important to winning those elections. And those qualities, as important as they are to win, are more important in some other ways, another way, and that's being president. To have someone that has those qualities, to be president of everybody, to respect everybody. You know, I had a great opportunity traveling this state with Barack Obama in 2007, and every day I was with him, I learned something. I watched him all the time to learn things, and I learned a lot. The number one lesson I learned from him was respect for everybody. Barack respected everybody. Nobody was more important than other people. And Steve is the same way. He has the same respect for people. And to have a president like that, particularly at this time, is just incredibly important. I've known him for 10 or 12 years, and I think I know him well. I know the quality of this man, and that's why I'm for him for president. I'm for Andy McKean for state rep. Andy and I have been friends for 40 years. Steve, we're sort of short-term. By these standards. Andy and I have been friends for 40 years. We've worked together. I've worked across party lines with him for a long time, but not anymore. We're in the same party, of course, now. You know, all that time, enormous respect for his abilities, his integrity, his willingness to pursue what was best for Iowans, no matter what the other considerations were. And I've always respected him, and I respect him so much for the courageous decision that he made to change parties. That was not easy. This is an incredibly politically charged environment, that he made a decision of conscience. And Andy, I'll always remember that and always respect it, and always treasure you as my friend and colleague in state government, to try and, as best we can, make this state as good a state as we can. Welcome to the Democratic Party. We're so glad to have you. And we're so glad to have you here this morning with Governor Bullock. Andy, thanks.
Well, that's a thrill for me to be introduced by the Attorney General. So thank you very much, Tom. I've respected Tom for so many years, and I'm very proud to have the opportunity to work with him in the future. You know, it was a very difficult decision to change my party affiliation. After all, I had been a Republican office holder for 35 years, and I've been proud of many of the accomplishments that Republicans have made over the years. In fact, Governor Ray was a mentor of mine, and I think he epitomized some of the best things in politics. However, as you know, I retired at one time And 15 years later, against my wife's advice, I decided to return to politics and was elected. And I found a very different place. The Republican Party that I belonged to for so many years had changed dramatically. And of course, my initial instinct was to try to work within it for my district. But after piece after piece of legislation came through that I felt was not in the best interest of my district and the people I represented, I felt the time had come to make a change. And also part of the equation too, which will bring me to my eventual introduction of Dr. Bullock, was my discomfort, strong discomfort with the current leader of the Republican Party. And since making my announcement, it's been a very interesting experience because we've had probably about 1,500 communications from all over the country and outside the country. I'd say about 1,250 have been very favorable and complimentary. Another 250 have been less so. And quite frankly, with very few exceptions, the negative comments have been vile and profane and in some cases quite threatening. And quite frankly, it's just made me even more certain of the correctness of my decision, because I believe that we have a president who emboldens that kind of behavior. And I think that's a very troubling thing that's happening in our country today. I just thought you'd be interested. It'll just take a minute. I brought along 3 kind of samples of the kind of responses that I've had. And one is, this one is from a Democrat and from Florida. And she says, I'll leave off the nice compliments and stuff. She said, I must confess, as a 71-year-old, I have never been in such fear for our democracy. During these dark times in our country, I look for beacons of hope. And there were a lot of letters like this from people who are just simply very, very concerned about the direction our country is taking. The next one is from a Republican from right here in Iowa. And I got many, many letters like this, hundreds, quite frankly, from Republicans. I too have been extremely concerned with the direction of the Republican Party and have seen it drift away from my core beliefs over the last 10 years. Recently, the change has been egregious at the state level and horrifying at the federal level. As a faithful Christian, I see a Republican Party that cares little for the environment, the consequences of its policies, or the needs of those less fortunate, which is in stark contrast to the party of Lincoln or Teddy Roosevelt. For years, I have believed I was a Teddy Roosevelt Republican, and have told everyone I discuss politics with so. This week, I believe I might just be an Andy McKean Democrat. And then finally, we got quite a few letters from outside of this country, and they all were very similar. And this one is from Canada. I'll just read one paragraph of it. I can assure you, as someone who travels quite a bit, the rest of the world sees as the Trump absurdity the worst reflection of the ugly American stereotype. Thankfully, he is not reflective of the true greatness of the USA. We are, however, truly amazed that more people in America are not doing more to speak out about the worldwide embarrassment caused by Trump's repeated boorish behavior and his constant and obvious lying. He has brought only ridicule and shame to the American reputation. We wish to thank you for standing up for decency and civility and criticizing Trump and the huge embarrassment he has become. And I don't think many Americans realize how our reputation has suffered around the world. Which leads me to tell you that my wife and I are both very interested in learning about the different candidates running for president, because we feel it's so important to pick the right person to represent the Democratic Party in the upcoming election. And of course, in Iowa, we have a great opportunity, and it's been a pleasure for me to get acquainted with Governor Bullock. And I've done some research on him too, and there are a number of aspects of his candidacy that I think are very encouraging and I think well worth considering. Number one, of course, it's very important that we elect somebody, we nominate somebody who get elected. And the fact that Governor Bullock has been successful in Montana is, I think, very encouraging. Montana is a very Republican state. However, he's been successful in being elected. And you know, if you take a look at what happened in 2016, where the election was lost, it was in rural America. And I think all things being even, if we can find a candidate from rural America who can speak to rural America and who understands the values and the challenges of rural America, it would be could be a very important part of the equation of picking a winning candidate. Secondly, and more important, I'm very interested in a candidate who has the demeanor and the skills and the wisdom to bring people together and to kind of try to repair our broken political system. We hear so much noise from both ends of the spectrum, from the very right wing and from the very left wing. And I think many people forget that the vast majority of Americans, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, what they want is a president who can pull us together and make some real concrete accomplishments. I think they want a president who can help solve our healthcare crisis in this country with some constructive approaches, who can have a compassionate approach to welcoming people to our country while making sure that the bad actors don't come here, who can find some kind of a balance between public safety and recognizing Second Amendment protections, and also have a constructive approach to climate change. And first of all, to admit that it exists, which would be a step in the right direction. And I've taken a look at Governor Bullock's record in Montana, and he has done a lot of those things already in a very difficult environment. And he's done tremendous things in the area of campaign finance reform, which I think is a critical issue. They passed some excellent health care legislation. They put some money into their mental health and opioid concerns. And it's a real record of accomplishment and working cooperatively with across the aisle, getting things done. And also, of course, I think we want a president who can be a strong, good moral influence for our country. And from everything I can gather, he is such an individual. So I'm not making any endorsement today, but I am. But I tell you, I'm very, very, very proud to meet you. I think you have the qualities we're looking for. And, you know, I just want to do my due diligence. I need to we Iowans like to,
yes, you do.
to meet them. But I think you have the qualities we're looking for, and I'm very, very proud and happy that you would come to Maquoketa, and let's give a nice Maquoketa welcome.
Thank you so much, Representative, for the kind words. Attorney General, thanks for being with me along this ride and the endorsement. I hope that you all know what you have in Tom Miller. Good, because from my perspective, I was Attorney General before I was governor. And when I got elected, one of the first things I did, I actually took staff from my office and said, I want you to go to Iowa. I want you to spend a couple of weeks and learn how he does consumer protection, learn how they present, and they do work in agricultural areas. So he's been not only a friend, but a real mentor of mine. And I so appreciate you all coming out bright and early on a Saturday morning. It's like you're accustomed to things like this. But as Andy and Tom spoke, it made me think a little bit back and harken back. So I got elected governor in 2012. And at the time, my kids were 6, 8, and 10. It's been 40 years since kids that age have been part of this whole experience of being a governor and our governor's family. And I said, in my first day of the state, I said that, you know, the sounds from the governor's residence will be a little bit different now with young kids. But we need to recognize that our kids learn from our words and our deeds. How we treat one another as elected officials. It doesn't just stop there, it goes all the way down to our children. So we need to start acting like our kids are watching, because they are. And I think that fundamentally you're right, Representative McKean, or who, even someone from overseas. We are at a challenging point in this 243-year experiment called representative democracy. And it's being tested. And we have to figure out which way we're going to go. And fundamentally, I think that you all gather on a Saturday morning for a unifying purpose. For the sake of this country, for the sake of this country standing in the world, for the sake of what we're going to pass on to that next generation, we gather to make sure that Donald Trump is not re-elected next year, for sure. But fundamentally, I imagine that that's not the only reason why we come out and we get engaged. Some of you might be here because you saw firsthand, are seeing firsthand the impact of a broken economy. If you look at millionaires are getting tax cuts, the person who cleans this library paid more than Amazon did in taxes last year with $10 billion profits. Yet, if you're like most Americans, you're working harder and making less. The average American worker in real terms hasn't had a pay increase in 40 years. Or if you're a parent or you're a grandparent, you think about what's the future for my kids going to be. 1970s, when I was raised, 90% of 30-year-olds were doing better than their parents were when they were 30. Today, only half of 30-year-olds are actually doing better than their parents were at their age. Well, and if you're from small towns, like I am, like most of you are, you know that about 150,000 new businesses were created the last decade. But 2/3 of the counties in our country actually lost businesses. And you shouldn't have to leave your home or your church or your community just to make a decent living. And it was so fun to actually, before I came over here, I got a tour of what's happening in your community. And how your community is saying, we can build this place and make sure it's a place that folks will move home to and raise their kids and grandkids. So in part we come to get rid of Trump, but we also say we could be doing better economically. And then you look to the political system for help. And you see a broken political system makes it that much harder to get a fair shot. Dark money is taking over these elections. Before Citizens United, 2% of all outside spending was by groups that didn't disclose where that money's coming from. This last election, it was over half. Tax codes are being written to protect millionaires because folks say that's what our donors want. Environmental laws are being gutted, ultimately to make the polluters happy. And you know what? We can understand, I can understand why folks get frustrated, angry, and anxious. But instead of bringing people together, Trump's poured gasoline on this fire. We are more divided as a nation than any time in my lifetime. Forget Twitter or cable television. Go down Thanksgiving dinners or a conversation at the coffee house or a bar. And that's not the promise, from my perspective, of America. We're so much better than this. Look, my background, so I was raised in Montana. I was raised in a single-parent household. At least my parents divorced in grade school. Mom got remarried in high school. Only knew there was a governor's house in town because it was in the neighborhood and I delivered newspapers to it as a kid. So I've made it 4 blocks in my whole life. But I worked my way through college. I borrowed my way through law school. I'll never forget that day my wife Lisa and I, we paid off what was in today's terms $170,000 of law school and college loans. How we celebrated the day that we wrote that last check. But you know, I had a shot from delivering newspapers to the governor's house to raise my 3 kids in it. And there's so many people now that don't feel like they do have a fair shot at this thing called the American dream. For far too many people in this country, they never really have. And we need to change that. And first things first, we need to ultimately make sure that this guy doesn't get reelected. But we also have to be taking the corrupting money out to make sure that Washington, D.C. is working for all of us, not just the Koch brothers, not just the Trumps. And I fundamentally believe that we can do that. And I think that's why I'm here. I imagine that's why you all are here too, irrespective of who the candidate is. And the first things first though, we've got to win. And if we're going to win, we also have to win back some places that we've lost in the past. Don't kid yourself. It's not going to be enough just to be against Donald Trump. This guy could win again. If we don't change our strategy, if we don't win back places that we want, and if we don't give people a reason to vote for us, not just against him. I look at your county and as Attorney General Miller says, oh yeah, Trump took Montana by 20 points. Yeah, that's kind of ugly, but guess what? He took Jackson County by 20 points. A county that had consistently voted Democrat. So it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy to make sure that we win, but I know that we can do it because I've seen it done before. As I said, I was the only Democrat in the country to get reelected statewide in a state where Donald Trump won. He won by 20, I won by 4. 25 to 30% of my voters voted for Donald Trump. And there's a lesson here. We can't just write off places that we didn't win in the last election. Or we can't write off places that are difficult to win. Because if so, we will lose. And you know what? We'll deserve to. Ultimately, I don't win by just going to patches of blue. I get out and talk and listen to people. Our next candidate has to do that ultimately if how we're going to win. We got to take back a lot of those places that we lost. It's not just enough to win though, and I get even though they all haven't come to your county yet, but I get I'm the 37th candidate or something like that to join. And showed up in Des Moines, it was 2 nights ago, and walked into this great place, and first person I meet is like, great to meet you. What took you so long? And I was governing, so I signed my last bill on Monday of this week. I announced on Tuesday, and by Thursday I was in Iowa. But as Tom, or as the Attorney General noted, that even in this time of deep division, I believe government can work. And my legislature's now, it's the best it's been since I've been governor. Still a little bit more Republican than Iowa's. It's a little worse than Washington, D.C. It's about 60% Republican right now. But even with that legislature, we've been able to get progressive things done. We passed the most progressive law when it comes to outside spending in our elections, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Just this last cycle, this last legislative session I just got over, for the third state to pass a foreign monies ban in our elections. We got Medicaid expansion through and just got it reauthorized. 100,000 more Montanans having health care, 30,000 having ultimately mental health treatment. We got parity between our physical health and mental health. Record investments in education. Frozen college tuition. We had the 4th lowest college tuition and fees in the country by design. We've actually been investing it's not even about all for college. It's people that may not ever thought they were college material, but we're getting apprenticeship and work-based learning, giving people a path to actually have a better life. We've been able to do that, sure, by looking for that common ground, by trying to find where we can agree, but never once by compromising what I think are our core values. I've gotten progressive things done, but I also have more vetoes than any governor in the history of our state. Every single attack on a woman's right to make her own health care decisions, we've stopped. We've preserved access to the courthouse for injured people. We've preserved access to the ballot box for everyone, and even maintaining things like same-day voting. We protected our public lands and kept them in public hands. And we've stopped every single, through a veto, every single attack trying to make Montana a right to work for less state. We've been able to do that in a way, and I think the lessons for winning and governing are fundamentally the same. You've got to show up, you've got to listen, you need to find common ground, but you also can't compromise the values that you held. The Attorney General talked about how we got Medicaid expansion through. Forgot the county chair, county commission, your county supervisor's chair wasn't even from Shoto. He's from Bynum. It's a suburb of Shoto. It had 50 people in it. But by giving them the opportunity to recognize that at the end of the day, most of us forget our political ideology. We value the same thing. We want a safe community. We want a decent job. We want a roof over our head. We need clean air, clean water, good public schools. We want to believe that you can do better for your kids or grandkids than yourself. And if those are the values that we focus on, the things that people really want, a whole lot of the noise that you hear is a lot less important. And we actually do share more in common than what divides us. Now, I think DC could learn a lot from what we've been able to do in Montana, but I'm not so naive to think that this would be easy. And fundamentally, until we address the one thing that's held us back in so many ways, and that's the corrupting influence of dollars into our system, it's going to hold us back as a country from addressing so many other things we really need to. Montana has a history of both corporate corruption and taking it back. About 100 years ago, we had mining barons called the Copper Kings. They literally owned every state, local, and federal official. In 1906, the newspaper said the greatest living issue confronting us today was whether the people shall control the corporations or the corporations shall control the people. Regular folks just said enough's enough. They took their government back. They passed this law called the Corrupt Practice Act of 1912. And what it said is corporations can make no expenditures, no contributions in our elections. And all of a sudden, government became responsive. And that was the law. For 100 years, elections were won by talking to people, not by how much money you raised. Then came Citizens United. Citizens United, a Supreme Court case that equated money with speech and corporations with people, and said that corporations could spend as much as they want to influence our elections. Every state in the country, when that came down, I was Attorney General at the time, every state in the country said, game over, nothing we can do. And remember, we even had, in DC, Democrats controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency. And we all decried it. People gave speeches, but they didn't do anything. I knew because of our history in Montana, I had to do something. So I actually built a case. I got testimony from Republican legislators talking about what even the threat of all these dollars could do to our system. It was the first case, so I took it all the way to the US Supreme Court. All the way, first case after Citizens United, so excited. And we lost on a 5-4 decision. The US Supreme Court held with corporations over people, again. So don't ever kid yourself what a difference one Supreme Court justice can make when it comes to clean elections, when it comes to environmental protections, when it comes to workers' rights, when it comes to women's health care. Again though, instead of saying there's nothing more we could do, I doubled down. And I worked with our Republican legislature. At the time it was about 2/3. And we passed a law that said 90 days out from election, no matter what sort of organization you call yourself, you have to disclose every dollar you spend. And I'll never forget, I was running for re-election in 2016, and 91 days out, the Koch brothers, American for Prosperity, were nice enough to, again, mail postcards that my children would be embarrassed to be my children when they looked at them. Like, what a horrible human being I was. But you know what? Day 90 it stopped. And yeah, we need a new court. Yeah, we need a new constitutional amendment. But if we can kick the Koch brothers out of a state like Montana, we could do it in Iowa and every single place around the country. It starts. I know over the next months and months that people will come to your community, they're going to make attenuated connections to Iowa, they're going to try to ingratiate themselves. I'm not going to tell you my great-great-grandparents settled in Henry County in 1850. I won't tell you the truth that my mother was born in Ottumwa, because none of that's important. What is important is, from my perspective, how are we going to be Donald Trump? How are we going to preserve and protect this 243-year experiment called representative democracy? And how are we going to ensure that whatever we give to that next generation is a lot better than what we have today? It starts in community halls like this. It starts by recognizing that we have to give people a reason to vote for us and be with us. It starts by winning back the places that we lost and building bridges to make sure we're going to move forward. I'm an optimist. You have to be with 3 young kids. But as an American, that's also part of who we are. And we know that we're better, actually, when we can listen to one another, not divide into warring camps. We know that we're better when all voices can be heard. When a fair shot at opportunity isn't just for those most wealthy. I do believe that we can be that country again. We can go back to restoring this idea of restoring a more perfect union. That's why I'm spending my Saturday mornings in Iowa. That's why I will come back time and time again. And I know that Iowa Nice will continue to be, you're on my list. So you're saying I have a chance. But I hope you'll take a close look at both what we're doing and how we're going to do it. Because we can win this election, but more important, we can get things working again. So appreciate you all being here, and I'd be happy to answer almost any question. Question, sir?
Net neutrality.
Yes.
I saw on your website net neutrality.
Yeah.
And then a little bit about the Chinese.
Yep.
With
Right.
the hostage, I guess you'll call it, up in Canada. And this is, from what I was kind of gathering, a $400 billion business deal here that to stop the communications with that company in China. Can you give me some insight of what this can mean for the internet and for our freedoms?
On the deal with the Chinese company, Huawei. So I'll start with net neutrality and then I'll go to talking to Grace. So one of the bizarre moments, well I shouldn't say bizarre moments. So I'm sitting in my office and my assistant comes out and goes, Governor, your 15-year-old daughter is calling through the switchboard. I'm like, okay, why would Caroline call through the switchboard? So I pick up the phone, I'm like, hey honey. She goes, Governor? And I go, yes. And she was with all her friends because the FCC had just repealed net neutrality. And she goes, you know, Dad, we just called our 2 senators, and we called our congressman, and I'm like, honey, did you use your last name? She goes, no. But now I'm calling you, what are you going to do about it? And I'm like, this is a Washington, D.C. problem. There is nothing I can do about it. And there's only thing worse than losing an election or offending a constituent is when you're a 15-year-old daughter who doesn't think you're too cool anyway, is disappointed. So we started thinking about it. And we wrote an executive order that said, if you want to sell internet services to the state of Montana, you have to preserve net neutrality, so you can't spend more for certain sites, or you can't slow things down for other places, for all Montanans. Now, I recognize that Montana isn't necessarily the market maker for our entire country. But then I made that into a template. And I said, sent it to other governors, and said, hey, it'd be great if you might take a look at that. The next day, 2 tiny states called New York and New Jersey signed the same thing. Then we got a Republican state in Vermont and Democrat states. So it's easy to turn around and get frustrated in Washington, D.C. and make speeches about how horrible it is. But even then in Montana, it took a 15-year-old daughter to say that speeches aren't going to be enough. What can you do about it? So I didn't save the internet, my daughter did. Now what will happen as China bans this, or as we ban the import of it was Huawei or whatever, I don't know, to be honest, and I haven't looked into it enough. I need to from the perspective of, I think that, and A.G. Miller and I, my Attorney General days, when you look at sort of what a lot of our broadband infrastructure is in Montana and the way it's built out, I do think it's pretty darn secure. The bigger issue too of China, it's not unlike what happens to us in Montana as well. Our farmers and ranchers are getting hit on both sides. Getting hit because you don't have a market, and you're also getting hit because still aluminum tariffs are that much more expensive. If he continues down this path, if this is the way the administration does it, the Trump administration, every family in the country will pay an additional $2,000 a year in cost because of these tariffs. China has had a long history of, but they did it with steel, they did it with chips, they're doing it with tech now, of they build off, basically fence off their country to any competitors. They state subsidize an individual actor. They build that up and unleash it on the world. And we've seen that, and I think we have to be hard on China. Hard on trade and also hard on the intellectual property theft that they've been taking. I mean, U.S. companies can't even work over there without essentially giving up their intellectual property. But he's kind of taking this America First approach to America alone. I mean, since World War II, we've been strongest by building a community of nations around us, building our allies along. And sort of the blunt instrument of tariffs, I don't see how it turns out well for farmers and ranchers, and I sure don't see how it turns out well for just American producers. They're going to continue, China will take the longer game. But I don't have the specifics on that one company. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
What's your stance on gun control?
My stance on gun control is I so wish that we could turn around and start looking at this as a public health issue. When I was a kid growing up in Montana, the NRA was a hunter safety and a hunting group. Now it is a political group and nothing more. I think that there are steps, and I'm a gun owner. I hunt, I enjoy it, but I'm also someone who, when I dropped off my 6th grader at a new school, his first week, he's like, yeah, Dad, now I know where to go in case of an active shooter. No sixth grader should have to have that experience. I thought,
Last call.
yeah. So I think we actually looked at it. Look, gun owners want to keep their families and their communities safe, and they want to keep guns out of the wrong hands. Those of us that are concerned about dropping off our kids feel the same. Universal background checks, absolutely. We ought to be able to do that, and the majority of gun owners and non-gun owners agree. Red flag laws, the ability to make it so that you can remove a gun in situations where there's either domestic violence or that you know that a child might be troubled. It ought to be pretty easy. Fixing the national NICS system so that the real information is in there. And as you look at assault weapons, they're not used for self-defense and they're not used for hunting. If places like Walmart and Dick's can already ban the further sale, it's time to take a look at this as well. But think about even after the Las Vegas shooting. Even this president initially said things like universal background checks or at least raising age limits. And he said, let's ban bump stocks. It took over a year and a half for that to happen. It's another one of these, if we even knew who was writing all the checks to the National Rifle Association, it could fundamentally change their ability to actually influence our elections. Until we fix that side of the money side. Think back, whole nother issue, climate change. George H.W. Bush turned around when he was in the White House and he said, we'll address the greenhouse effect with a White House effect. Meaning we, a Republican president, said we'll lead from the top. Now Republicans can't even acknowledge climate's human cost. Because of oil companies and others, their donors are saying you can't do this to us. So, long way to say I think we can do a lot more on gun safety and protecting our communities. But on all of these big issues, we're all also going to have to address the corrupting influence of dollars, or we're never going to get necessarily partners on the other side to move with us.
Hey, Governor, we have time for one more.
Time for one more? Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk to me about education? So we have a federal government that is gutting education. We have a governor that is gutting education. Rural communities are suffering desperately to keep teachers in, to keep just even nice people in their schools. I mean, really, like, yeah.
Yeah, and I can tell you what we've done in Montana, but it won't help you, right? Like I can tell you that we have record investments in our K-12 system. That my first 4 years that everybody said, oh, Bullock, you grew government huge. I'm like, no, there are fewer state employees. 40% of all my increases went into my K-12 system. Because if I don't have one of the great equalizers, a quality public education system, then I'm not going to have a workforce, I'm not going to have communities, I'm not going to have any of those. There is two pieces of this, though, and then also for what happens in Iowa. The great thing is you're going to have all these candidates come and say how much we love you, and then we leave, right? Then we're all gone come next February. So I would turn around and say, at least give some thought to, you need somebody at the top of the ticket that's actually going to help in Jackson County. And once we leave, your legislators, your real work begins, right? Because you got to get control of your legislative bodies, or you're going to continue to have these horrible bills, and you're going to have your K-12 system gutted, underfunding of higher education too, your regents universities. I mean, that's where we have the fourth lowest tuition and fees. It didn't happen by accident. We're putting more and more state money in each and every year. Because I turn around and say, you know what, a tuition increase, which we've frozen 6 of the 8 years, that's a tax increase on every working family that's trying to struggle to get their kid through college. At the federal level, it's not without a little bit more of a challenge. So we pay about, on the K-12 side, 6 to 8% of your local budgets. And what we've seen under this administration have been trying to pull that back and gut it. Federal level was always to protect people with individuals with disabilities. Specific challenges along the way. Racial inequalities. And Betsy DeVos would like to privatize all public education. I mean, this is a great equalizer. I would not be here were it not for my public education. My kids go to this very... What is your first name, Steve? I mean, my kids go to the very same schools that I went to as a kid. So I think that the federal government will never be able to do as much on the K-12 system as they should. On the college side, we spend collectively as taxpayers, I think $144 billion a year on higher education. I think that there is better ways we could spend it in part. With our Perkins loans and things, we also ought to allow it for shorter term one-year certificates. We ought to, this administration's also rolling back, the sort of the fly-by-night private colleges, how much money ends up getting loaned out to that, which could go to individuals and do a lot better. We have to really address those folks that, the top quintile of the economy, 80% of those kids are going to college. And 56% are completing within 5 years. The lowest decile, the lowest 20%, it's only 19% of the kids that even go, and only 9% that complete. So, I'm not one that will go pre-college for all. Because I'm also, and making college affordable and accessible for everybody is really, really important. And it's something that I would love to get to in every single way, but my experience as a governor is I have to balance a budget. I can't make promises to you unless I can say, here's how I'm gonna pay for it, and here's how, in an environment in Washington, D.C. where nobody wants to pay for anything, and they wanna further cut our taxes, and make it, there was $1 trillion of stock buybacks last year from the Trump tax cuts. I didn't get anything out of it, and my kids got $1.5 trillion more of debt that they're gonna have to pay over this next decade. I'll close, I so appreciate coming out, listening. I hope now I'm somewhere on your list of your top 37. But I promise I will be back here time and time again to Iowa. I really hope, I have some campaign staff here, really hope you'll check out the good work we're doing, and I hope by the end of this I can earn your support at caucus. Thanks so much. It's funny, so I'm not good enough at these press things. So if somebody asks me a question, that's what I did with you. I turn and I'm talking to you.
So the ABC got an exclusive photo of your ear.
I know. So guys, like, even whoever you're talking to, whoever's question, you have to look at the camera. So don't view me as rude if I'm not.
But also
looking.
don't look directly in the camera. Look at the interviewer next to the camera.
So many rules, so many things to learn. Please.
So, Governor, welcome to Iowa.
It's great to be in Iowa.
Yeah, and so what have you learned so far, just in your first couple of days?
In my first couple days, I've learned that Iowans really do take this seriously. That Iowans want to win, want to believe that government can actually work. And I'm excited about taking this on because in Montana, in some ways, winning elections, it's really about people talking to people. I mean, me listening, getting to go on like a tour of this community, but that retail connection, I think, matters for all of us.
And so you're centering this campaign around the corrupting influence of money. Why do you think that is going to be a singular issue that will carry this?
Well, and I don't think it'll be the singular issue. I mean, I'm centering it on that I can win in the places that we need to win. I've actually made government to work. But for all the things that all of the candidates are speaking about, in many ways, unless we address the corrupting influence of money, we're never actually going to be able to get to them. Meaning that Washington's a place that when the Trump tax cuts, Senator Graham literally said we have to do this to make our donors happy. I mean, we are now to the point where, unfortunately, far too much of the time in Washington, D.C. isn't spent saying what's going to be best for Iowa or whatever community they represent.
but it's based upon what the donors want. So I think that that is sort of what's holding us back from making sure that the great equalizer of we're all equal on election day is preserved.
Okay, Governor, two parts to this question. Most candidates don't bring up foreign policy when they're talking, mostly focus on domestic policy. I wonder what connections foreign policy that's the area where the president really rocks, has the resources to do it. With domestic stuff, you've got to propose and the Congress disposes. But when you look at foreign policy, what connections do you see with foreign policy and domestic policy? And then the second part of it is a real sore point in our foreign policy has been our relationship with Israel. It's illegal occupation, it's illegal settlements, it's turning Gaza into the world's largest concentration camp, shooting children, that kind of stuff. So how would you like to see that relationship handled?
Well, the first in foreign policy, what we've done is turn sort of, President Trump said America first, but it really has become America alone. We're at our best when we're actually working with our allies for meaningful change. And it impacts our domestic economy, both areas like trade, but also the instability. The next president, number one, always has to be protecting American people, but it's also strengthen our alliances, deter our adversaries, and then promote our American values. The Trump reflex has been kind of treat our friends as adversaries and our adversaries as friends and go it alone. We've never been as strong as a country or a community of nations when you try to do that. When it comes to Israel, I don't think that this administration has helped what we need to get to, and that's a two-state solution. There was no discussion even when we moved the embassy of saying, well, what can we actually do to help have expectations of Israel along the way?
We have time for one more, Dave. Well, Governor, you talked about getting the budget to balance in Montana. A lot of Democrats hear balanced budget now and they think of grand bargains, cutting Social Security, things like that. What sort of revenue ideas do you actually have for taxes? Do you like the idea that Warren has a wealth tax on mega wealth? Do you like the Sanders idea of just or I guess more the Ocasio-Cortez idea of raising taxes on the very wealthy?
We haven't rolled out a comprehensive tax plan, but yeah, it certainly doesn't make any sense that 60 Fortune 500 companies pay zero in taxes, and actually get credits while the rest of us are paying. You look at that tax plan alone. No one was asking you to reduce corporate taxes. The corporations weren't asking you to reduce corporate tax to 21%. And 25% would have been competitive throughout the world. The thought that ordinary income and long-term capital gains are taxed at a different rate, you could change that and raise significant revenues as well. So in the upcoming weeks, we'll certainly roll out here's an overall tax policy, but there are ways that you can increase additional revenues without necessarily saying it's all about the wealthy. You could adjust the upward brackets, but I'm not sure that we need to go as far as some people are.
Just clarify, when you said we had to balance budget in Montana, you're not talking about entitlement reform, raising Social Security. You're not talking about that side of it.
No, what I'm saying is every time that we're talking about new programs and new spending, I want to be able to give thought to how we're actually going to pay for it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good seeing you.
Thanks so much for coming, Ken.
Yeah, it's great meeting you. Thanks for being here.